All right, hello students. So we'll pick up today where we left off yesterday. So just to start us off with a couple quick housekeeping notes. So for folks who are on A1, B1, or C1 for the collaborative writing project or communal writing project, excuse me. For those, make sure just you have an eye on getting started on those stories. I know everyone has different work styles and different schedules, so it's ultimately up to you. But I just don't want those people to lose sight of that your beginnings of these stories are due for Monday's class. So by Monday at 11 a.m. And this is really wide open. So whereas for everyone else, your task is going to be to continue the story that's already been started. For the people in this number one spot, you have both the benefit and the challenge of kind of starting us off. So again, this shouldn't be the whole story. This should just be, again, the first 1 to 3 pages of a story, and do what you want with it, right? So I would encourage you to include at least one speculative element. So some element of, magic or fantasy or science fiction or, kind of whatever that means for you, whatever you're kind of most drawn to. Other students can certainly add additional speculative elements as we go, but you're giving us the foundation. So again, remembering, what we encountered in that first chapter from Harry Potter, remembering what we saw when we first started reading Aloft by Joe Hill, and thinking about how those things sort of set the stage and kind of, gave us a situation, gave us, some rules that we were dealing with, some characters we were working with. And that's kind of your task for that. So then again, you'll post those to Canvas. You'll just submit them as an assignment. I will post them for the whole class to be able to read and comment on. And again, what we'll mostly be focusing on just positive feedback and kind of, again, some conversation around what helps us or what hinders us from continuing a story onward. But then people who are signed up for the second slot for A2, B2, and C2, they will have their pieces of the story due Wednesday of next week. So it'll be a fairly quick turnaround, but you'll have time to read over what your predecessor did and draft something new. And again, it's only 1 to 3 pages. And again, I feel like most of you, when you start writing, that won't feel like very much. It can be daunting when you just have the blank page in front of you. But I assure you, at least from most of my experience working with students, when they get started writing, it's actually harder to keep it to that short amount of space as opposed to a challenge to fill that much space. But okay, so that's what's going on for the communal writing project. To be transparent, I have not read a good portion of the comments that were posted on yesterday's discussion as I'm recording this. That's kind of next on my to-do list. So if there are questions there, I'll do my best to tend to those after I finish recording this. But please feel free to add questions to this thread as well. And again, I'll keep trying to monitor that and answer questions as they're introduced. Similarly, though, for the group-led discussion project, groups 1 and 2, so you're going to be commenting on Aloft, and again, different elements of it, things that grab your attention. I'm trying to leave some blank space here and not kind of cover every single thing that I think we could talk about in these readings, in part just to be time efficient and not kind of overwhelm the whole class, but also to leave you some room to be able to dig out some pieces that are of interest to you. Again, pretty open-ended in terms of what you want to address. But you want to be giving us some level of presentation about, something that grabbed your attention, some element of this novella, some character of it, some, way in which it's written. It's all kind of fair game from there. And again, you're introducing a minimum of 3 open-ended questions for the class. And again, especially for group 1 and to a reasonable extent group 2 as well, because you're having to work on this before seeing other groups go. Feel free to check in with me. I have individual questions. I will definitely take into consideration, though, that you're the first groups to go and you haven't had a ton of time to think about this. Rest assured, if you're meeting that, at least 10 minutes or so of content and generally meeting the guidelines laid out there, you should be just fine for this assignment. But okay, so to get to part 2 of Aloft from Joe Hill's Strange Weather, this is where I want to just sort of pick up where we left off. So a few places I want to jump to. First off, on page 273, we see this stark kind of shift in how the text is presented. So I'm going to hold this up. I know you probably can't see it very well, but we have just sort of normal text up to this point in the novella. Then we get this image. of the orb kind of shape. And I was curious what people make of this, right? I think I mentioned this in the previous video lecture, but Hill has played with the graphic novel form and collaborating with a partner on that. In this book, it's mostly straightforward text, but there are those moments like that, and I was curious what the effect is of that being the first introduction to this image of the, he described as like a black pearl. What sense we make of it, why we think Hill would make that choice. Just kind of general reactions in that vein. I also wanted to touch back on something that we started to talk about with the end of our previous reading section, which is the use of flashback. And now we're kind of in the rhythm of it in this next section you've read, where we're alternating basically back and forth between the present story up on the cloud or this ship, or however you would quite describe it, and the backstory of Aubrey's earlier experience, and specifically his relationship with Harriet. And again, now that we've gotten our feet wet with it, now that it's not just initial reaction to a bit of flashback, but more so that we can tell this is sort of the way that this novella is operating. What we make of that, what's working there, what's challenging about that, why we think Hill would make this choice. Because again, if we wanted to do this, in a kind of more straightforward linear fashion, it could have just been the entire backstory of Aubrey and Harriet, and then we get this whole story of him up on the cloud or up on the ship. The fact that we intersperse these two stories, that seems like a really intentional choice to me. And to be transparent, I think it works. I think, as you probably guessed, I assigned the novella, so it's not like I think it's terrible. But I could see arguments against it, or I can see at least contentions about how it's working, or why it works. So feel free to weigh in on all of that in the discussion thread. Okay, on page 279 now, I want to cut to the very end of that little chapter there. So I guess it actually bleeds from 278 on to 279. But it reads, by then his belly hurt from all the water he drunk, using a dipper as big as his own head to collect the rain from his deep tub. By then he had taken a nearly 30-second piss off the side of the island, a golden parabola leaping into the brilliance of the afternoon. By then, Aubrey Griffin had forgotten he was terrified of heights. It had, for the moment, slipped his mind. And it's such a strange moment in any sort of literature. The idea that someone had forgotten that they had a fear of heights. That's not the kind of thing you forget in any sort of remotely normal circumstance. So I think you could make some argument that maybe that moment's not very realistic. But if we want to get into that, really the whole idea of him being on this cloud ship thing probably isn't all that realistic. So I was curious what we think Hill is getting at when he suggests that Aubrey just forgot about this fear in that moment. What's happening there, is that relatable in a sense? Because I imagine some of us may have had experiences like that. I'm curious what you all might think along those lines. Okay, next point I want to jump to is page 282. It's this chapter 12. It's just this short little stretch here. I'm just going to read the whole thing for us here, just to kind of talk about our reactions a little bit. So again, it's on page 282. The stars came out. A swarm of bright sparks in the wintry dark. It felt like winter up here, 10,000 feet above the soil. Aubrey ate the last of his granola bar and huddled in his piles of blankets with the junicorn, pushing it into his face, trying to smell Harriet on it, remembering the way her hair smelled that night in Maine, like pine trees, like juniper. Thinking about Maine, remembering the way they yanked at each other's clothes, kissing almost desperately, Aubrey felt the need for Harriet as intensely as he had ever wanted water. And in the deepest part of the night, he pushed the blankets back and climbed carefully, almost shyly, to his side. A Harriet made of cloud, pillowy white breasts, cool flowing silk for hair, lips of dry fog, tongue of cool vapor. He sobbed gratefully, drew her to him, and fell into her, a long, sweet plunge without a parachute. Okay, so I'm really curious as to what people make of this section here, because I think it's one of the more vivid parts of this. I think you could argue it's sort of creepy, right? Because essentially at this point, Aubrey is having sex with this ship, or some extension of this ship, this entity. It's still difficult to put our fingers on exactly what this thing is, but he's definitely engaging with this thing on a physical level. I could see someone calling that creepy. I could see someone calling that beautiful, right? This idea that he's kind of intertwining his memories with this more immediate experience, that he's bonding with this thing. I could see some beauty in that. I could certainly see a simple reading that is sort of surreal, and you're not being sure what to make of it. But I think it's also interesting that it directly follows chapter 11 there, where we get to the brink of Aubrey and Harriet kind of coming together, and the effect of cutting off that scene and cutting to this one in chapter 12 there. I think it's a really interesting move by Hill. I think it's one of the moments where he more vividly really intertwines the backstory with the present story in a meaningful way. Again, I'm just kind of curious as to reactions, what people make of it, how you felt about that really provocative scene. Okay, so I want to jump up to 289 here. And I'm not necessarily going to actually, read anything verbatim from this section, but we have here June basically, talking to Aubrey and saying to leave it, right? That it's unfair to him the way things have been happening, not just to Harriet, excuse me, and it's sort of a moment of realization I would suggest for Aubrey in terms of what June is telling him, when she doesn't have any reason to lie to him at this point, right? Her health is deteriorating. It's clear that she's not going to be with them for very long, and she's telling him basically just to move on, to leave behind this thing with Harriet, and it clearly makes an impression on Aubrey and kind of takes him aback a little bit, and so I'm curious what we kind of make of that, what we think that the June is saying and why, I guess, is kind of the question I'm getting at. And this isn't a trick question. I think it's fairly clear what's going on here, but I do also think it's an important point for understanding the larger novella. We're going to talk about some more of that in tomorrow's lecture and discussion, but I wanted to introduce that point now. And then one other point I want to jump to again. I don't think I'm necessarily going to read anything verbatim from this section, but starting on page 300 to 301, Aubrey comes upon these bodies, right? And we have these notes that they left behind and some hints at what happened with them. And again, not a trick question, because I think that Hill gives us enough pieces to pretty reasonably figure out what's going on here. But to make sure people don't miss it, because it can be a little complicated. And again, I know I'm assigning a fairly large number of pages per class session, and so if you're just kind of reading as quickly as you can or multitasking while you're reading, it's possible to just kind of miss some significant points. But what's going on with these bodies that we find, and kind of what that tells us about Aubrey's situation, about this cloud/ship, what sense we make of this, and how this might steer what we think is coming next in this novella. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. Again, there's so much more that we could drill into, and I welcome you to bring those things up in the discussion thread below, in your individual reading response journals, which, by the way, so far have looked really good. I'm kind of trying to take them day by day and kind of grade what I have, so I appreciate your patience for those who have had some that might be sitting for a couple days at this point. Rest assured, I will be getting to those ones as well. But yeah, again, in the discussion thread, so far from what I've seen, it's looked really good. I appreciate the level of engagement. I appreciate especially the back and forth that a lot of you have taken to heart, not just answering the questions that I pose to you all, but engaging with each other in really a discourse kind of back and forth. That's the kind of thing that I think is relatively easy to facilitate when we're all there in person, and is really hard to recreate when we're in this virtual kind of platform, and where we don't have a live discussion kind of happening in a conventional way. So I appreciate you doing that. Please keep that up in the discussion threads. Please keep up the great work on journals, and again, please let me know if you have questions about the reading as well. If there's pieces that just don't make sense to you, it is a somewhat confusing test, at least conceptually speaking. I think the writing is relatively straightforward, but what's really happening here and how we read it, I think there's a lot that's up for interpretation. So pose questions there as well, but also logistical, practical questions specifically about the group-led discussion or the communal writing projects. Again, those due dates are coming up for the first of you to go. Feel free to weigh in with questions about all of that. Okay, thanks again for watching. We'll have one more video lecture for the week coming up tomorrow, and then we'll all get to take a breather over the weekend and reconvene on Monday. But until then, have a great rest of the day, and hopefully I'll see you all tomorrow.